Good morning, everyone. It is 10:10 and time to begin. And today we will continue our discussion of organized crime and its relationship to digital crimes against businesses, against individuals, and crimes against humanity, specifically in the arena of terrorism. So that said, I will do some screen sharing here, and we will begin with a Bloomberg video about Russia's involvement in hacking and black market activities.
Russia is building a mothership for its sovereign tech. They're coaxing companies and workers here with promises of government support, blurring the boundaries between Kremlin control and bootstrapped entrepreneurs. Russia exploits that fuzziness as it projects power on the web alongside tenacious hackers, the specialty of one of Skolkovo's rising stars, a criminologist named Ilya Sachkov.
Hello, Ilya.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Ilya heads Group IB, a private company based in Moscow that tries to find ever-elusive Russian hackers, unmask them, and then hand them over to the authorities.
We something like the superheroes in our field. We help our clients to solve very, very difficult cases. We use the branding like FBI.
Look at your picture, Ed. You look like James Bond.
This is Photoshop.
Group IB specializes in investigating fraud and theft, the type of stuff that makes up 99% of cybercrime.
People look on the cybercrime like an iceberg. They could see only the upper thing, but underwater, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of politicians, a lot of corrupt people from the different organizations, and this is the future.
They walk a tightrope, cooperating with Russian law enforcement while also serving major international clients like Citibank and Microsoft.
You have foreign clients today, huge companies, but as the tensions between China and the US and Russia, they just seem to be escalating, especially when it comes to cybersecurity.
Actually, we had office in New York. It was really funny experience because every week we have had excursion from FBI, from the New York police. They ask, what are you doing here?
It just seems like that will make it so much harder for you guys to expand your
Why?
business.
I think with our knowledge that we really have good understanding of Russia's cybercrime. So I think this is competitive advantage.
But do you think with the tensions between the US and Russia right now that Russia would be upset if you had an office in Silicon Valley?
I think yes. We have some toxic knowledge about the organized crime and cybercrime, and I think it's not the government, it's some people in government. Private company without any control do investigations, get some knowledge, of course they are not happy.
И для меня, как криминалиста, имеем дело с Fancy Beer. Это очень странно, что преступные группы используют это имя.
You think of hackers as these guys sitting in their basement with their hats and their hoodies on. Well, this is what the people look like who hunt them. This is Russia's largest cybercrime event.
И как вы думаете, в ближайшие годы, как изменяется ситуация атак?
Самая главная проблема, которая ждет человечество в ближайшем будущем, это появление кибертерроризма, который не интересует атаки, связанные с финансами, а интересуется атаками на критическую инфраструктуру, и они используют те же самые инструменты, те же самые механизмы, которые изобретает классическая организованная преступность. Хорошо, идем.
Ilya started Group IB in college with a few buddies. One of them is Dmitry Volkov, the company's head hacker hunter.
То теперь они будут фокусировать ресурсы рекрутинга для того, чтобы найти людей, которые способны проводить целенаправленные атаки и будут их делать. И здесь уже не будет целью шпионаж, не будет целью отключения в случае акта агрессии. Здесь цель злоумышленников одна – это нанесение максимального урона, желательно с человеческими жертвами, и получение максимального информационного резонанса.
I visited Group IB's Moscow office to find out more about how Dmitry chases cyber criminals.
Is the Russian hacking community, is that the biggest cybercrime community in the world?
We're different, so Russian-speaking hackers are so famous because we share knowledge, we develop tools, we share information about how to attack banks, how security measures applied on different systems. So a huge amount of information is available on the ground community.
What's the art of that and the technique?
Main goal is to get the full history of hackers' activity, because when hacker starts, he do a lot of mistakes. We have more than 100,000 profiles about hackers who communicated on Russian-speaking underground community. It is fully automated. We have artificial intelligence implemented in security solutions. We have special algorithms to detect unknown programs, and it's always interesting to see and, of course, to track how hackers adopt their techniques and tools to do attacks.
What does a Russian hacker look like? Who are these people?
If he's an attacker who is doing just technical job, usually he lives alone. But if you talk about organizers of fraudulent schemes, usually these people are very rich. They don't wear hoods, they drive in good cars, live in good houses, have very beautiful women. I can say it's like a mafia.
Group IB now occupies an uncomfortable position at the intersection of Cold War geopolitics and organized crime, like the mafia from Russia's unruly Caucasus. During an early Group IB investigation, Ilya learned that one of their targets had ordered the mobsters to kill him.
If you know about the Caucasian organized group, it's not funny at all.
And do you have bodyguards?
I had bodyguards for 2 years, but I understand if someone would like to do something bad, they will do.
Это автомат Калашникова. Это опасное оружие, но оно не такое опасное, как, например, ядерное оружие. После того, как произошел Карибский кризис, страны между собой, поняв, что они находятся перед большой катастрофой, сумели договориться контролировать ядерное оружие. Общество пока не понимает, что кибертеррористы могут использовать компьютерное оружие за 1 секунду через территорию другой страны, что приведет, естественно, к катастрофе. Катастрофа, которая изменит нашу планету. Что должно произойти, чтобы страны договорились и придумали единый инструмент борьбы с компьютерными преступлениями? И это то, что общество может спасти.
All right, so I think that video gave you a fairly good overview, and you can see that it was made some 6 or 7 years ago. So the mention of tensions between the United States and Russia and China have only been exacerbated over these last half a dozen years. But you get a sense of the scale, the enormity of the hacker community, and also the hierarchy and organization of the crime syndicates. And now I want to share with you, it's really just a piece of a Al Jazeera news/documentary that also talks about the cyber problem.
Bank robberies were depicted by men in masks carrying bags with dollar signs on them. Oh, how quaint that idea now seems. Because these days, robbing a bank has taken on a whole new meaning. We're talking cyber theft, not a new issue by any stretch, but one which grabbed the headlines certainly in our part of the world this past week when Qatar National Bank was targeted in a cyber attack. The bank says it is investigating the matter, but what's significant is that no money seems to have been taken. It was a robbery of data. Hundreds of customers' account details, their passwords, their social media profiles, they were posted onto a whistleblower website. For what reason, no one really knows yet. But what it proved once again is that data is almost more valuable than money itself these days. Just take these examples, all of them recent ones too. Back in February, cyber thieves swiped $81 million from the Bangladesh Central Bank. The hackers were never found, and it now represents the biggest bank heist in history. They used malicious software to transfer the money from the US Federal Reserve to the Philippines. The central bank in the Philippines itself said it thwarted an attack on its website this past week. And SWIFT, the network which banks use to transfer billions of dollars every day, recently issued its own warning about multiple cyber fraud incidents targeting its system. Well, we need to discuss this from a few angles. Our first guest is joining us via Skype from Dubai. He is James Line, director at the London-based SONS Security Institute and global head of research for security firm Sophos. James, this isn't a new topic, but if we just look at the last few months, the attack on QNB, the Bangladesh incident, the Philippine Central Bank now, what do you make of it all? Do you draw any correlations or conclusions about what's been going on?
Well, look, as you said, this is far from a new business. We're 27 years into the market of creating malicious code with cyber criminals stealing information. But it certainly feels a lot to me like it's accelerating. And I think there are really two reasons for that. The first is we're all putting much more information online and handing it over to many more businesses than we ever have before, which of course gives cyber criminals more places to steal it from. And equally, I think cyber criminals have become far more professional than we've ever seen before, allowing them to achieve greater scale.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're saying cyber criminals, I notice, and that's probably right because, you know, we usually use the word hackers, which makes them sound like, you know, cowboys operating out of their basement or whatever. But as you say, it's all quite sophisticated, really.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the term hacker has very different connotations to different groups of people. And I think there is still this perpetuated image of the spotty teenager sitting in their basement with a hoodie doing this hacking. And certainly, I'm sure there are a few of those. But if you look at the modern cybercrime industry, where I hang out on these forums with various cybercriminal gangs trading their wares, these guys have software products designed to enable crime, exploit packs that facilitate the hacking of various companies that make it point and click easy. Over 50 different competitive products, in fact, at this point in time. So by any economist's definition, it's an illicit market, which I think really gives appropriateness to the term cybercrime.
Okay, if we look at some of the specifics, say the Bangladesh Central Bank incident, $81 million cleaned out there. That was obviously a very specific attack which went after a huge amount of money. But I wonder on other occasions, like the QNB incident, if it's about showing what can be done. Look, we can hit you. You and your data are vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of landscape of actors has changed very interestingly over the last couple of years. If we go back, say, 4 or 5 years, really, the grand majority of hacking, the grand majority of malicious code, of all computer security incidents, was laser focused on making money. I mean, that was by and large the goal. Since then, we've seen, the rise of nation state hacking, of governments getting involved in this for intelligence purposes, or maybe not the rise of it, but maybe greater public awareness of it might be more appropriate. We've also seen a huge resurgence of hacktivism. And that's, again, not a new idea, but it's something that had really fallen to the wayside for about 10 years. And that's the idea of people hacking into systems to steal data, to publish it, for causes, for political agendas. And that's been a driving force behind a lot of these larger data breaches of late, with large amounts of citizens' information being published in the face of specific regimes, of specific organizations. And I think that's a really interesting trend that behaves very differently to the 99% of cyber criminals out there who are really interested in your credit card details.
Can I also ask you, James, about the geographical nature of what's been happening? Cyber attacks can happen or be launched from anywhere, obviously, but when you look at some of the recent ones, they're not established Western institutions and economies. The technical infrastructure is perhaps less sophisticated. Are they being hit because they are softer targets?
You know, I think if you actually look at the true distribution of breaches, they're happening everywhere. I mean, I troll a lot of the kind of market sites where cyber criminals sell stolen information, and it's incredibly common to see a large number of records, of course, from places like the United States. That being said, I think some of the places you're mentioning have been targeted by hacktivists. They've been focused on as a result of regimes, as opposed to pure economic interest, as with many credit card thefts in the United States. I also think that in some places there are more lax attitudes towards information security. There are some interesting cultural issues. For example, I found a lot of people in the Middle East don't expect to receive localized scams. They think a lot of the scams would be in English with kind of obvious overt dodgy looking links, you know, very much the scam that we would have seen 5 or 6 years ago. Whereas the modern cyber criminal or fraudster is far more targeted in their attempts to ensnare people. So that's an interesting kind of difference between expectation and reality that may make some regions more vulnerable than others. But it's truly a global issue given the interconnected and borderless nature of the internet.
All right, that's James Line there, cybersecurity expert. Thank you, James.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
So let's continue our discussion now with our second guest this week. Joining us here in the studio, Nuruddin Olabi, who's a former professor of information security at Strayer University in Washington, D.C. and a cybersecurity consultant. Lovely to have you with us.
Thank you.
Let's look at this as we've been speaking off camera about the attackers and the defenders, right? The attackers will keep attacking, they will keep pushing, they will keep coming up with new ways to attack. And I fear that the defender will always be chasing their tail, actually, that they will be behind. Is that how it actually is?
That's right, Kamal. I think that's very true, the fact that attackers are on the edge of technologies, right? Defenders, in this case being enterprises, are always going to be slower than attackers, in the sense that they have to be dealing with legacy systems. They have to move like an elephant, if you will, because it's a whole enterprise to adapt to the ever fast moving world of technologies.
That's not good, though. If I'm just looking at it, a consumer now, it doesn't give you much confidence, or it gives you less confidence, I think, all these attacks than we used to have.
That's you know, technically speaking, it's right? But what are the options that consumers have today? If you look at the banking industry, and we've seen a couple of incidents in banks recently, people are choosing, you know, the lesser of the two evils, because your other option is to keep your money at home and be robbed, or walk away with a lot of cash and be robbed that way, right? So you have to get a level of trust to the bank in the banking industry example. Same with all your data, with everything that we do. We live in a more interconnected world. Today we talk about concepts like the Internet of Things, where objects are all connected. Your you know, mobile, your everything is just connected.
So then have we also almost got to question the strength of the infrastructure?
Right.
Because you were talking to me earlier about the SWIFT situation, which is the back end, you know, driving all the transactions to the front end, which is the banks and the online banking.
Right.
And that system's an old system. Is it not keeping pace with our Internet of Things?
That's right. And not only is it an old system, but it's also designed with a security model that's old, that's not applicable in today's time and age, right? That security model was based on a completely isolated network, and that network would have terminals, and, you know, bankers, you know, send out the transfer requests and so on. Today, we're more interconnected. Those networks are not as isolated as they should be. These endpoints can be compromised by attackers, and they can, try to access those what we thought to be very private networks that are not really as private as they should be today.
Nuruddin Alabi, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And still ahead on counting the cost, protecting Africa's remaining elephant populations.
All right, I don't think we have to discuss elephant populations today. So we will stop Al Jazeera at this point. A couple of the things I want you to take note of or think about. One of the points that was just made by the interviewee on Al Jazeera is that enterprises are all too often beholden to what we call entrenched systems or legacy systems, mainly due to investment and the need to depreciate the equipment, that they can't just be spending multi-millions of dollars on new things just because. There has to be a very clear and definite return on investment, or ROI reasoning involved. So because enterprises are beholden to these entrenched systems, they're immediately put at a disadvantage to their attackers, who are much more lithe, much more easily to change and move with technology advances. And then along with that same idea, to also note that security designs and frameworks have really evolved over time. And this plays into some of the discussion that we had a couple class periods ago with data privacy and data protection, that if those things are not baked in from the get-go, it becomes quite difficult to have a hodgepodge of add-ons that really do justice to protection of the data, and often little leaks spring in our systems when we don't think the design through very thoroughly from its creation point. And because of all these things, businesses have an immediate challenge upon them, because sophistication of the attackers just continues to grow. We learn from these videos that there is these vast underground networks, and especially in the Russian community, they're very collaborative. They share information. They help each other gain sophistication, and it is a tremendous battle. So I am going to share my screen again. And will point you to some materials that are here for your viewing pleasure. We have a web address for the FBI Crime Complaint Center, which I think you should take a quick look at. I think some of the information there will assist you in one or both of these assignments due this coming weekend. And as well as the article on cybercrime being the modern day mafia. And then specifically, we're going to take a look at this now, this hacker intelligence initiative report, which is an analysis report by a company named Imperva that speaks to the crypto wall ransomware, one of the most destructive and, shall we say, successful, at least in the minds of the criminal, successful ransomwares that have been launched to date. So the Imperva ADC, the Application Defense Center, is a research organization. So they spend all of their time doing vulnerability discovery and security analysis. And then they issue these very in-depth reports that can be then used by all the business community to develop a more mature posture when dealing with cyber attacks. So by understanding the vulnerabilities, they assist the business community with these reports that sort of enlighten people, provide insights and recommendations for moving forward. So in terms of the crypto wall, specifically crypto wall 3.0, here are some of their main findings. They were able to trace the Bitcoin wallet back to cyber criminals profiting from the ransomware. And they determined that the ransomware indeed was quite sophisticated, and that the attackers, the organization of attackers actually went to some very great lengths to obfuscate, confuse, and maintain their anonymity. Just to point to some of the main features in the report, they actually were able to get their hands on an email that was delivering the fish, and it was part of a fairly widespread campaign. And you can see that it was delivered to a Yahoo address and posed as a job resume posting. There was the myresume.zip file, which then contained malware, posing as a Acrobat portable document format file, PDF. So the end user received this email and they opened it with the browser. A PHP script gets executed, so a scripting language similar to Python, and then a Google Drive file was accessed, which actually loaded an malware executable. So we can see some of the internals of the web page, some of the hypertext markup language where iframe technologies were embedded into the body element of the HTML. The PHP script, which you can see referenced at this point right here, arch.php, it was aimed at redirecting the user to the Google Drive locations that then downloaded the myresume.zip file. That zip file contains some compressed ransomware executable that had, sort of a long and drawn out name, but you can see if you look at the article that the file extension was SCR. So little hint there that it might be some kind of a script. And then we can see lots of Google Drive link locations. Web and cloud storage is a great thing, but I believe that this incident and those like it should hammer the issue home that strong passwords and good user authorization schemes and frameworks are key in protecting information, as well as good scrutiny on the user side of things to not believe every email that you receive. Always be cynical about things that you receive, especially things that you are not especially expecting. Now let's talk about the payment process, because typically hackers are doing what they do to make money. We know there's a small percentage of hacktivism that goes on, but in the big scheme of things, it's typically about making money. Okay, so after encrypting files on the end machine, because this is ransomware, CryptoWall adds some help decrypt files to the affected directories. And those files contain information about how to pay the ransom. So each infected user is going to get some kind of personal link with an instruction page. And we can see that there is an information, even reference to a Wikipedia article on RSA encryption, trying to be so helpful to the end user. We also see that the CryptoWall used the onion router, so Tor services, so that again they could obfuscate or confuse which routes were actually taken, which network hops were actually traversed from their origination to their destination. And the use of Tor also, as we learned previously, it encapsulates or rolls layers over the communication, again, to insulate or to obfuscate the original place in which the message originated. So this CryptoWall also gave some various URLs or web page addresses that the infected individual could use to pay in Bitcoin. And then the third sample here shows yet other URLs. And you can see that they're constantly changing the options because, you know, once one gets found out and there's enough time given to researchers to figure it out, they're moving their resources somewhere else. So it's a complete cat and mouse game over and over. But the Imperva organization did determine that all those domain addresses did resolve to IP addresses in Russia, registered in Moscow, and that domain records associated with Russian email addresses were all tied to these URLs. Okay. You can read through the report and learn about how Bitcoin wallets were generated, and the details about how the communications between the attackers and the victim sort of played out. The crypto wall virus ransomware actually conducts geolocation observation on the victim's computer to choose appropriate packaging. So the researchers, the analysts, noticed some very interesting facts about the ransom. There were different fees based on the geolocation of the victim. So these attackers, I think, you know, had an element of good business sense about them. The ransom amount for USA was $700 in US dollars, whereas Israel, Russia, and Mexico was a little bit of a lower price. So they were doing some market research on the various geographies. So they clearly knew information about the socioeconomic status of individuals in these various countries. So if the victim doesn't pay the ransom with CryptoWall before the timer runs out, then the ransom doubles. Okay, so in the case of Israel and those Middle Eastern locations, it went from $500 to $1,000. So this is an exploit on human psychology, giving a sense of anxiety or time constraint to the victim. And the researchers follow the money. You know how they always say FTM, follow the money. So they tracked the transactions all the way back to originating wallets. Now, keep in mind that at the very beginning of this report, the emphasis was made that this whole attacker group was pretty sophisticated about shielding their identity. So anonymity was one of the key focuses in this entire campaign, and thus the payment was in cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. the crypto wall victims were instructed to transact with the attacker's Bitcoin address, but the analysts were still able to find some transaction history of the attacker's Bitcoin account and follow the blockchain. And that information is spoken about in this section of the report. We can see that there was quite a detailed transaction summary of the wallets. And the total amount of the Bitcoin payment and the number of transactions that ensued. There was also a scatter plot, which shows the transactions that were performed through both front end and then back end wallets. We get some information here in this part of the report about how the Imperva analysts correlated the front end Bitcoin addresses with various samples that they were able to collect, and the graphs basically illustrate how these cyber criminals used often the same wallets for different campaigns. And so that actually may have been a minor misstep, because that allows correlations to begin to emerge. The analysts saw many of the transactions ranging in that, that fee range between the $500 and $700 mark. And the presumption is that those were probably victims who indeed paid the ransom to get their data decrypted. So here again, we see another sort of scatter plot that shows the front end wallets in blue and then back end wallets in the green color. So you can show that this, look at the sort of the plot to give a visual depiction of how the significant part of the front end wallets were indeed sending these payments to these back end accounts. And let's just go down to the very end and find out what the bottom line recommendation. Many reports and research pubs go into great detail explaining the anatomy of ransomware malware. But in this report, and what makes it interesting, is that Imperva demonstrated sort of the technique of peeling back the layers behind that financial infrastructure to show that you can really gain some insights and great information on the attackers. And then they indicate that they strongly believe that one of the reasons ransomware is thriving is really the lack of action from law enforcement agencies. And the main, I think that main reason is lack of resources and lack of knowledgeable officers in those agencies. So that leads us to believe that in this whole realm of technology, crimes, and law, that a real uptick needs to take place in crime fighting from a digital perspective and not just the on the ground policing. So let's look at those final recommendations: to deploy file monitoring, back up regularly, and those are the two main recommendations from this particular report. I think in addition that every company should participate in regular and fairly intensive security awareness training for their end users, because the more aware everyone is about the methods of attack and the types of schemes that are going on, the fewer people that will be scooped up in these types of activities, these types of attacks. All right, so in conclusion, you do have a couple of assignments that are due at the end of the week. And next class period, we'll probably do some review and then sort of segue ourselves into a new topic. So prepare any past due assignments and the ones due this coming weekend. And other than that, we just have a great week. Reach out to me if you have any questions. You know where to find me by email and via Calendly if you want to set up an office appointment. Have a great one.